You compare prices when shopping for flights, hotels, cars. So why not small business insurance? At Simply Business, we'll show you policies that fit your business and a range of prices to help you save. Who knew buying insurance could be so simple? Visit simplybusiness.com for your free quote today.
When you run a business, there are a lot of boxes to check.
Let's see. Payroll? Check. Inventory? Check. Insurance?
Well, good thing Simply Business makes getting small business insurance fast and easy. Just answer a few questions, review your quotes, and get covered in under 10 minutes, all online. It's that simple. Check insurance off your list at simplybusiness.com.
The True Crime Society podcast contains adult themes and violence and is not intended for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised. And if you'd like to skip the intro or move to any specific part of the podcast, please refer to the timestamps listed in the episode description. Thank you. What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the True Crime Society podcast with Stephanie and Olivia. We're recording this June 2025. We're recording some backup episodes for, when I have this baby and might be like a little preoccupied. So we're just trying to get some episodes recorded ahead of time so that in case anything happens, if I'm just like very, very sleepy or something, we'll have some episodes to fall back on. So we're not really going to have much chat in this one because who even knows?
It's going to come out. Yeah.
I mean, the usual weather rundown. It's rainy here. It's warm. It's okay. It's fine out. It's fine. Less hot than it has been. Peeps in my lap. All the usual stuff here.
It is actually very cold this morning, and I'm like on my computer when I'm recording, it's got like a weather thing down the bottom, and it's got the little thermometer, and it says temperatures to drop. So it must be getting colder. Yeah.
Yeah.
I do have this listener of the week too. We
do have a listener of the week. Mm-hmm. Who knows when they'll get to hear this?
Yeah, but eventually, hopefully, they're still listening. Yeah. So. Their name is obviously not their real name, I'm assuming, but it's Chemical Revenge. She wrote, "Ladies, you two make my week. I started listening while doing chores, and now I listen during chemo. It helps my drifting chemo ADHD brain stay focused. I love your banter chats, the honor you show victims, and genuine thoughts. So much love and positive energy from Idaho, USA." So thank you very much.
So today we are going to be talking about the case of Dean Arnold Corll, who it's been suggested for a while. Right now, I think that she suggested a couple times, our Patreon subscriber, Lauren V.
She actually said, because often we ask for suggestions, and she's like, "I'm just giving my monthly suggestion for this one." So she has suggested it many times. And do you know what? To be honest, I'll be honest, I wasn't really that keen because I'm like, never heard of it. It's probably not that interesting. But this case is completely insane. I can't believe I've never heard of it before this. It did happen a little while ago, which is probably why. But if this was happening today, this would be the biggest news story of probably the decade. It's wild.
Yeah, and just a trigger warning because I know we talk about a lot of murders, but this one is very, very heinous and disgusting. Yeah. It does have to do with children, abuse, teens.
Torture.
Yeah. So Dean Arnold Corll, he abducted, raped, tortured, and murdered a minimum of 29 teenage boys and men between 1970 and 1973 in Texas. He also had two accomplices named David Owen Brooks and Elmer Wayne Henley, who were also kind of essentially started out as victims.
Yeah, well, he sucked into them, essentially.
Yeah.
And they were teenagers at the time too, they were young. So yeah, he absolutely manipulated and groomed them.
Yeah, and so their crimes came to light after Elmer ended up fatally shooting Dean after he kind of just had enough. These murders have also been referred to as the Houston mass murders, and we've seen comments along the lines of this being the craziest serial killer case that you've never heard of, which kind of does seem to be true.
Yeah, and when I was looking at videos and things for this episode, they do also refer to them as the Candyman murders. So maybe you've heard of the case as that. So yeah, which we'll get into why very soon.
It's one of Houston's most coveted neighborhoods.
Everything we did, we walked, we played outside.
But for some families, the Heights carries a dark past.
It's a terrible thing, and it should have never taken place.
In 1971, Donna and Lenore Loverick's brother Randy disappeared.
How did you know your brother was missing?
His boss called my mother and said he didn't show up for work.
They had no idea he was murdered by Dean Corll, a serial killer known as the Candyman. Because of his family's sweet shop that used to be across from a school off 22nd Street, he tortured, raped, and killed 30 teenagers with the help of Elmer Henley and David Brooks.
These were not quick and easy deaths. These were long, arduous, just excruciating.
Victims advocate Andy Kahn says the Houston mass murders made headlines around the world.
Well, we'll put it this way. It's still going on in some places out here in the Heights.
Only after Henley shot Corll and their crimes were revealed.
Back then, sadly, most of them were just considered runaways. There really wasn't any, effort made to locate. You didn't have groups like Texas Equus Search.
And that's why it's so important to get the word out now that there's still one unidentified victim left.
So again, some background about Dean Corll. He was born on December 24th, 1939 in Fort Wayne, Indiana. His parents were Mary Robeson and Arnold Corll. He also had one younger brother named Stanley. Arnold the father was said to be very strict, and Mary was said to be very protective. His parents, they argued frequently and ended up getting divorced in 1946 when Stanley would have just been around 4 years old. And that would leave him with a very unstable home life. Mary sold their home in Indiana and moved to a trailer in Memphis. Arnold had been drafted into the U.S. Air Force at this point. Dean was said to have been a shy and serious child. He rarely interacted with other children. He was very sensitive and couldn't handle rejection or criticism very well. He was also quite a sickly child. He contracted rheumatic fever and was also found to have a heart murmur. Doctors recommended that he avoid too much physical exercise due to his various conditions. Mary and Arnold ended up getting back together and got remarried in 1950, which was 6 years after their first divorce, which I feel like that is very tumultuous for children.
Yeah, imagine already going through the divorce, knowing that your parents are broken up, and then they get back together, and then, spoiler alert, they get divorced again. So yeah, it would have been so much for those kids to deal with.
Yeah. The family then moved again to Pasadena, Texas, which another move is probably not ideal either. And of course, like Olivia just said, the second marriage did not last long. They got divorced for a second time in 1953. Mary got custody of the boys, and the divorce was amicable, and both boys kept in contact with their father. After the second divorce, Mary married a man named Jake John West. They moved to Vidor, Texas, and Mary had a daughter named Joyce Janine in 1955. Jake and Mary started a candy company that ran from their garage, so this is where that candy name came from. Dean and Stanley worked at the company while also attending school. They were responsible for operating the machines and packing the candy while Jake sold the products. Dean attended Vidor High School, and he was said to be a well-behaved but average student. He was a loner, but he did occasionally date women. He played the trombone in the school brass band as well. He graduated in 1958, and the family moved to Houston so that their candy business could be run closer to where the majority of their sales were made. They opened a shop called, you say pecan or pecan?
I say pecan, but I think you guys say pecan. I don't know. I say pecan.
Called Pecan Prince or Pecan Prince, however you prefer to say it. I don't know which is correct. From there, in 1960, when he was around 21, Mary asked Dean to move to Indiana to live with his widowed grandmother. So there's been so much moving in the story already, like all over the place. Now they're moving back. So he lived there for 2 years and returned to Houston again to work on the candy business. So a lot of just back and forth and moving around. Mary then divorced Jake in 1963, and she opened a new candy business called Corll Candy Company. Dean was appointed vice president of the company, and Stanley was appointed as secretary treasurer. So now we have dueling candy companies.
Yeah.
That year, a teen employee complained to Mary that Dean had made sexual advances towards him, so Mary just ended up firing the teen instead of dealing with that. Dean was then drafted into the Army in 1964. He was assigned to Fort Polk, Louisiana for training, and he was later sent to Georgia to train as a radio repairman. His permanent assignment location ended up being Fort Hood in Texas. Dean's record in the Army was said to be unblemished, but despite this, he hated being in the military and applied for a hardship discharge. He said that the reasoning was he needed to run his family business. His request was granted, and he was given an honorable discharge in June 1965. He'd been in the Army for 10 months at that point. Some of Dean's acquaintances would later say that it was when he was in the military that he first realized he was gay. He had his first homosexual encounters during his time in the Army. Dean returned to Houston after he left the Army and began working at the Corll Candy Company again. Jake, who was the former stepfather, had kept owner of Pecan Prince in the divorce with Mary, and the competition between the two companies was said to be very fierce. Dean worked long hours to meet the demand for Corll candy, and in 1965, the company moved their location to be across the street from an elementary school. Dean was a favorite among the local children as he would give them candy for free, and he seemed to seek out teenage boys to give the candy to. He was nicknamed the Candyman and the Pied Piper by the local kids, so I'm sure you kind of see where this is going. It's very, very creepy. He really put himself in a great position for his disgusting desires and ideas. Dean was said to act flirtatiously towards teenage male employees of the candy company. He installed a pool table in the candy factory, and he would encourage the local young males to gather together and listen to the music and play pool. In 1967, when he would be around 28 years old, Dean groomed a 12-year-old boy named David Owen Brooks. This is one of the boys we mentioned at the start. Dean would take David to the beach. He would also give him money, and Dean also initiated sex with the child, and this went on for years. By 1969, Dean was paying David, who was probably about 14 at that time, in either cash or gifts in exchange for sex. David had a broken home life. His parents were divorced. He dropped out of high school when he was 15. Dean allowed David to stay at his apartment whenever he wanted, and it was reported that David considered the apartment his second home.
I feel like this is just absolute classic grooming behavior. Like, he's picked David because David was vulnerable.
Down on his luck.
Yeah, had no family support. So Dean kind of capitalized on that and gave him money, which he probably needed, provided some type of
thought it seemed cool
home.
to
be around this older guy
kind of
who has a cool candy company and all that type of stuff. So absolutely, he, I think, probably specifically picked David because he knew that David was easily manipulated.
Yeah. The Corll Candy Company closed in 1968, and Mary and Joyce moved to Colorado. After the move, Mary never saw Dean again. Oh, okay. After the company closed, Dean began working as an electrician at the Houston Lighting and Power Company. He would become a supervisor in the company, and he worked there until he died. Spoiler alert, he dies. Not really a spoiler, but... Dean is thought to have started his killing spree around 1970. It lasted for 3 years. All of his victims were males, aged between 13 and 20 years old. The majority of the victims were in their mid-teens. He seemed to stalk the area of Houston Heights, which was a low-income neighborhood for his victims. So again, he's kind of preying on the more vulnerable population who might be a little bit more desperate for attention or handouts or some help. So just a typical abuser, serial killer move. He worked with the two accomplices we mentioned earlier. It's David Brooks that we were just talking about and Elmer Henley. They were both teenagers at the time. We'll get a little bit more into Elmer later. Some of the victims were friends of the teens. He also picked hitchhikers to make victims of. Two victims named Billy Balch Jr. and Gregory Winkle had been past employees of the Candy Company, and the victims were kind of collectively given the nickname of the Lost Boys. Dean would entice the victims into his vehicle by offering a ride to a party or a lift to wherever they needed to go. And instead, he would take them to his home where he would then give them drugs or alcohol until they passed out. Then he would strip them, handcuff them, and would tie them to his bed. He also made some type of plywood torture board, which hung on the wall in his home, and he would use that on his victims. So I can only imagine what that board looked like or was used for.
Before we get into today's episode, we're going to hear a word from our sponsor, Skylight. Sometimes it's so hard to keep track of everyone's schedules, where everyone's got to be, who's got things on, what's happening at school, what's happening at work. If you're managing your family's school schedule and life schedule across multiple calendars, crumpled school handouts, and scattered post-it notes, we've got a game-changing idea for you. Put it all in your Skylight calendar. Skylight Calendar was designed to help you manage the chaos of family life. Ditch the mental load of juggling everyone's schedules by putting it all into one clear place. This all-in-one smart touchscreen calendar brings visual structure and color coding across your schedules, tasks, lists, and anything else that your family needs. You can assign colors for each family member so that everyone knows where to be and what to do. No more nagging, confusion. I forgot, Mum, I didn't realize. And if you're not 100% thrilled with your calendar in the first 4 months, you can return it for a full refund, no questions asked. Right now, Skylight is offering our listeners 30% off their 15-inch calendars by going to skylightcal.com/TCS. That's skylightcal.com/TCS for $30 off your 15-inch calendar. That's skylightcal.com/TCS.
Dean would torture his victims for days. He would sexually assault them, beat them before killing them, either by strangulation or gunshot. All of the bodies were wrapped in plastic and buried in one of 4 dumping locations in Texas. There was either a rented boat shed in Houston, a beach on Boulevard Peninsula in Galveston County, a wooded area near Lake Sam Rayburn, or a beach in Jefferson County. Dean would often force his victims to contact their families prior to being murdered, which really just makes me sick.
Yeah.
He did this so that they wouldn't be reported missing right away, and essentially to buy himself some more time with the torture kill process. So I could imagine he had these poor kids tell their parents they were running away or they were doing something so that their parents wouldn't worry about them. Which I can only imagine these poor kids knowing that they were kind of just digging their own grave doing this. Dean would often retain keepsakes from the victims, usually their keys. And during his killing spree, Dean would move addresses multiple times, but he always remained pretty close to Houston Heights. There's not a ton known about all of the victims because there is so many, so we're going to run through the ones that we do know more information about. So his first victim was Jeffrey Conan, who was 18 years old. He was murdered on September 25th, 1970, and he had been hitchhiking and was picked up by Dean. Dean buried Jeffrey at High Island Beach, and forensic evidence determined that Jeffrey had been strangled to death and had been gagged with cloth. His body was buried beneath a large boulder. He'd been covered in lime, wrapped in plastic, and his hands and feet had been bound with nylon cord. After Dean killed Jeffrey, David Brooks, the accomplice that we'd mentioned, walked in on him sexually assaulting 2 teenage boys, and they'd been tied to his 4-poster bed. Dean told David that he would purchase a car for him if he remained silent. He purchased a green Chevy Corvette, and Dean would confess to David that he had killed the two boys and offered him $200, which today would be about $1,650 for any boy that he would bring to Dean's apartment. So a lot of money offering
for a teenage boy. Yeah.
Yeah. In December 1970, David took two 14-year-old teens to his apartment. Their names were James Glass and Danny Yates, and they had been lured away from a religious rally. Dean would restrain them to his four-poster bed with a rope and handcuffs. He raped and strangled each boy and buried them in the boat shed that he'd rented. 6 weeks after those murders, David and Dean found two teenage boys walking on the street. Donald and Jerry Waldrop had been walking to their parents' home. The brothers were lured into Dean's van and driven to his apartment, where he raped and strangled the boys before burying them in the boat shed as well. In 1971, between March and May, Dean killed 3 more victims and buried them in the boat shed. Their names were Randall Harvey, who was 15, David Hillegeist, who was 13, and Gregory Malley Winkle, who was 16. David, the accomplice, was also known to participate in all of these abductions. So I'll get to Elmer Henley, who is the second accomplice, who was 15 at the time. He was friends with David Hillegeist, which was one of the victims we just mentioned. And he tried to tell David's parents that there might have been an innocent explanation for his disappearance. David's father, Fred, hired a private investigator and spent the equivalent of almost $10,000 in today's money trying to find his son. He said, "The money played out. When I hired him, I thought everyone worked together, with the police and everything. But I found out it didn't work that way." This info is from a New York Times article from 1973 where Elmer Henley is mentioned. So the article says, when Mrs. Hillegeist had the reward posters printed, she called on the boys in the neighborhood to help distribute them. One boy who she says was extremely helpful was Elmer Wayne Henley Jr., who lived only a block down the street. Mr. Hillegeist said she used to always give the Henley boys rides home from school when she went to pick up our boys. Wayne Henley used to help us distribute the posters. He was always helpful and very concerned, asking us about David. In late May, just before school let out for the summer, Mrs. Hillegeist picked up 2 of her sons at school during a rainstorm. She also brought home 2 of the younger Henley boys. Mr. Hillegeist said, when she let them off at their house, Wayne came out and got in the car and talked a while. He thanked her for bringing his brothers home and asked if she heard anything new about David. He was just as nice as he could be.
Just to clarify, obviously, Wayne is Elmer. His name is Elmer Wayne. He obviously went by Wayne. We've called him Elmer in the episode just because that is his first legal name, but I guess to his friends, he went by Wayne.
Yeah, so just to be clear, the article is just talking about how nice he was, always asking about David and trying to help out, it seemed. The next victim was Donald Falcon, who was 17 years old. He disappeared on July 1st, 1971. His body would be found dismembered in the boat shed. This boat shed, I can only imagine what it looked like what was going on in there. On August 17th, 1971, Dean and David encountered Reuben Watson Haney, who was 17, while he was walking home from the movies. Reuben was an acquaintance of David's. They convinced Reuben to attend a party with them, but instead, of course, he was taken to Dean's apartment. Reuben was strangled and buried in the boat shed. Elmer was then introduced to Dean by David in October 1971. He was initially lured to Dean's apartment as an intended victim, but Dean decided that he would actually make a good accomplice. So Dean offered Elmer the same deal as David, $200 for any boy who was taken to the apartment. He said that the boys would be taken into a white slavery ring, whatever that means.
Yeah, so I think he was trying to kind of tell Elmer that he wasn't going to murder these boys, but if it's any better, he was going to sell them into some sex trafficking, white slavery type of ring.
Strange. Elmer would later say that he ignored the offer at first, but he did establish a friendship with Dean. He described him as a brother-type person and said that he thought he could confide in him. By 1972, Elmer decided to take Dean up on his offer because he needed the money. He said the first abduction that he participated in was around February or March 1972. Elmer would later tell police that he and Dean picked up a boy and lured him back to the apartment with the promise of marijuana. On March 24th, 1972, Dean, David, and Elmer encountered a friend of Elmer's named Frank Aguirre, who is 18 years old. Frank was leaving work at the restaurant he worked at, and Elmer called him over to Dean's van and invited him to come to the apartment to drink beer and smoke pot. Dean raped, tortured, and killed Frank and buried his body at High Island Beach. Elmer assisted him with the burial.
So after this incident, Elmer became more active in the abductions and the murders. The 3 men, males, abducted Mark Scott, who was 17 in April 1972. Dean apparently chose Mark as the next victim as he had cheated him on a deal regarding stolen items. So I guess in a payback attempt, he decided to murder him. Mark was abducted by Dean and he attempted to fight back. He tried to stab Dean after he was tortured for several hours, but when Elmer apparently pointed a gun at Mark, he, quote, gave up. All 3 men shot Mark with a pellet gun and he was raped by Dean. He was strangled and buried at High Island Beach. David would later say that Elmer was especially sadistic during the murders. Elmer admitted to having been fascinated with how much stamina people have while being murdered. The next 2 victims were Billy Balch and Johnny DeLome. They were taken to Dean's apartment. The 3 men tied the victims to Dean's bed and tortured and raped them. Elmer then apparently strangled Billy for over 30 minutes. He also shot Johnny in the forehead. Johnny survived and pled for his life, but he was then strangled. So the next possible victim was William Ridinger. He was 19. He was tortured by Dean for over 3 days. David would say that he convinced Dean to let William free and that he was allowed to leave the apartment, which is wild. This is one of the only kind of surviving victims that I could find a record of. He was apparently let go. He was let go and was freed. He was one of the lucky ones. There was one incident where Elmer assaulted David. He knocked him unconscious as he entered Dean's home, and David was assaulted repeatedly and then released. Despite this, though, he then still continued to assist Dean and Elmer with the abductions and the murders. In the summer of 1972, the next victims were Stephen Sickman, who was 17, and Roy Bunton, who was 19. Stephen was struck in the chest with a blunt object before he was strangled and buried in the boat shed. Roy was abducted while walking to work. He was gagged with a towel and his mouth was covered with tape. He was shot twice in the head and he was buried in the boat shed. Just also, I know there are a lot of names and things to keep track of. There is a diagram that I found online that indicates where all these men were buried at some of the scenes and how they were buried. It says hole 1, hole 2, hole 6. So I'll pop that on the blog if you want to get an idea. But basically, they just picked these 4 dumping grounds and would basically dump them in there, I guess, until they were full or until they had to move on to a new area. In October 1972, Wally J. Simoneau and Richard Hembry were enticed into David's car and they were taken to Dean's house. Elmer apparently accidentally shot Richard in the mouth. The 2 males were strangled to death and buried in the boat shed. They were buried in a common grave above 2 other victims named James Glass and Danny Yates. In November 1972, Willard Branch, who was 18, disappeared while hitchhiking to Houston. He was murdered by the trio and his body was buried in the boat shed. That same month, a man named Richard Kepner, who was 19, disappeared while walking to use a payphone. He was strangled and his body was buried at High Island Beach. Between March and November 1972, the men murdered at least 10 teenagers. It just blows my mind too that this all happened in a 3-year time span. We know there are 29 confirmed victims. There's probably dozens more that they were able to just keep going with this, with basically no investigation. I just can't.
I don't understand.
And you know what? I know it's a different time. I know there was no technology, there was no phones, there was no CCTVs, all that type of
you
stuff.
You seem
so
to
it
be
was
preying on more
easier people who wouldn't be missed maybe as quickly. Yeah. But it just the short span of time that they murdered all these men, even if I didn't average 29 men over 3 years is around 10 men per year. At least one a month.
Still.
It's just wild that they were able to get away with it.
Yeah. Nobody was wait, where are all these people going?
Yeah. In early 1973, a teen named Joseph Lyles, who was 17, was killed by Dean. There are no known victims between February and June 1973. Dean was said to have been unwell during this time, so that may have accounted for the lack of apparent murders. Maybe they just haven't identified some of them, but he was said to be unwell during that time. But from June onwards that year, Dean's kill rate increased dramatically. Elmer would later say that the escalation was, quote, like a bloodlust. He said that Dean would appear restless and would smoke heavily before announcing that he needed to do a new boy. On June 4, William Ray Lawrence, who was 15, was abducted by Elmer and Dean. He was abused and tortured for days before being strangled, and his body was buried at the Lake Sam Rayburn. Raymond Blackburn, who was 20, was abducted 2 weeks after William. He was also strangled and buried at the lake. In July 1973, Elmer lured a teen named Homer Garcia, who was 15, to Dean's house. He was shot and left to bleed to death in the bathtub, and he was also buried at the lake. On July 12th that year, John Sellers, who was 17, was shot by the men and was buried at High Island Beach. That same month, David, the accomplice, married his pregnant partner. Elmer then became the single accomplice to Dean for a period of time. Between July 19th to 25, they worked together to abduct and murder 3 youths. One of these victims was Michael Balch, who was 15. He was the brother to a previous victim, Billy. So there's at least 2 sets of siblings that were murdered, because remember he abducted the other ones that were off the street, and they were brothers. And then so imagine I can't even imagine these families, and especially the Balch family, because for this to happen 2 separate occasions, not just whether the other case
they've done so many people
horrible,
that they're doing family members now.
Yeah. It's mind-blowing. But yeah, so Michael Balch was 15. The other 2 victims were Charles Cobble and Marty Ray Jones. Michael was buried at the lake, and the other 2 were buried in the boat shed. Dean's final known victim was killed on August 3, 1973. His name was James Stanton Dramala, and he was only 13. He was abducted while riding his bike. Dean took him to his apartment and raped and tortured him, and he was then strangled with a cord before he was buried in the boat shed. So after that murder, this is when things all went wrong for Dean. On August 7th, so just a few days later, Elmer invited a man named Timothy Cordell Curley, who was 20, to a party at Dean's house, and he accepted the offer. When Elmer and Timothy got to the property, they sniffed paint and drank alcohol before they left. After they left, it's like this is a kind of random story how this all came to be at the end. But after they left the house, they heard a commotion nearby, and they came across Elmer's friend, who was a female teen named Rhonda Louise Williams. She was 15. She had apparently been beaten by her father, and she had planned then to run away from home. So they came across her. They said to her, "Come with us." She accepted the offer, and they all got into Timothy's car. They got back to Dean's place at around 3 a.m. on August 8th. Dean was furious that Elmer had brought a female to the house. He said that Elmer had ruined everything. Rhonda explained to Dean about the situation with her dad. She said that she didn't want to go home, I guess kind of tried to placate him and say that she was there for, innocent reasons. Mm-hmm. Dean apparently calmed down, and they all began smoking pot and drinking alcohol. Rhonda, Elmer, and Timothy also sniffed paint, and they passed out after around 2 hours. Elmer woke up to find Dean handcuffing him. His mouth had been taped shut and his ankles had been tied together. Timothy and Rhonda had been bound with rope and gagged, and Timothy had been stripped naked. After Elmer woke up, Dean removed the tape from his mouth, and I think this gives you an idea too of how out of it they were. If Dean was able, they're unconscious because Dean was able to restrain them without them waking up. Obviously, they had been sniffing paint and drinking, so this
whole story is so weird.
Yeah. So after Elmer woke up, Dean removed the tape from his mouth. He told Elmer that he was angry about Rhonda being taken to the house. He said, "Man, you blew it bringing that girl." And then he shouted, "I'm going to kill you all, but first I'm going to have my fun."
I think it's interesting that he's abducted 20-something teenage boys, but one girl, and he's freaking out. He's this is the end all. Why does this have him in such a panic? The one girl, but I feel like it was probably more so that he felt like he was losing control over his accomplices, maybe, but it's just interesting to be this is what sent him over the edge.
Yeah. So he then repeatedly kicked Rhonda in the chest and shouted, "Wake up, bitch." Dean threatened Elmer with a gun. Elmer managed to calm him down and agreed to participate in the murders of both Timothy and Rhonda if Dean removed all his bindings. After 30 minutes of negotiation, Dean agreed and he untied Elmer. Dean took both Rhonda and Timothy to his bedroom and he turned a radio up to full volume to drown out any sounds that he was anticipating that they would make. While this was all happening, Elmer was sniffing paint again. Dean gave him an 18-inch hunting knife and told him to cut off Rhonda's clothes. He told Elmer that he would rape and kill Rhonda and that Dean would do the same to Timothy. By this point, both Timothy and Rhonda had woken up and come to and were pleading for their lives. Rhonda asked Elmer, "Is this for real?" and he said that it was. Rhonda then asked, "Are you going to do anything about it?" Elmer began panicking and started sniffing paint again. Elmer grabbed Dean's gun and shouted, "You've gone far enough, Dean. I can't go on any longer. I can't have you kill all of my friends." Dean taunted Elmer and said, "Kill me, you won't do it." Elmer fired one shot at Dean and struck him in the forehead. The bullet failed to penetrate the skull fully, though, and Dean kept lunging towards Elmer. This just sounds like an absolute horror movie.
It really does.
Yeah. Elmer fired 2 more shots at him. One entered his lung and lodged in his spine. Dean then tried to flee the room, but Elmer fired at him 3 more times and Dean died where he fell. So there was no saving him. There's actually a photo of his body. He's kind of lying face down. You can see there's blood on the wall.
Yeah.
So after his death, Rhonda, Timothy, and Elmer all kind of panicked. They discussed what they should do. Timothy said that they should call the police, and Elmer agreed. Elmer called the police at 8:24 a.m. on August 8th, 1973. He said, "You all better come here right now. I just killed a man." When police arrived minutes later, the 3 of them, Timothy, Rhonda, and Elmer, were sitting on a curb outside the house. Elmer and Rhonda were both crying. Elmer told police that he had made the call and that Dean's body was inside the house. An officer tried to read Elmer his rights and he said, "I don't care who knows about it. I have to get it off my chest." Elmer confessed basically everything to the police. He said that for the past 3 years, he and David Brooks had worked with Dean to lure and murder males. Police were initially skeptical of his story, which is kind of understandable because it is totally unbelievable. I'm assuming they were very skeptical due to the high amounts of numbers that Elmer was claiming had been murdered, the high amount of people. But Elmer was able to recall the names of some of the victims and police were able to corroborate them as being missing. So there was some validity to his story and they looked into it further.
It's crazy also how this was literally handed to police. Like if this didn't happen, how long could this have gone on for?
Yeah, like if Elmer didn't come forward, like I'm assuming he knew he was probably going to go down for Dean's murder, so he wanted to come clean and I guess maybe get off a little bit. But yeah, if he didn't come forward, I wonder.
And he's like spoon feeding them the information of like this person, this person, this person, like.
So when police searched Dean's house, they found the plywood torture board, handcuffs, nylon ropes, a large hunting knife, rolls of plastic, multiple dildos, and other rope. In his van, they also found rope, a stained rug, and other items. Elmer agreed to tell police where all of the victims had been buried. When the bodies were unearthed, many of them showed signs of sexual torture. Some of their pubic hair had been plucked out, their genitals had been chewed, they had objects inserted into their rectums, and glass rods had been inserted into their urethra and had been smashed. It's just barbaric. It's horrible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When one victim was unearthed, his mouth was positioned in such a way that police believed he had died screaming. David went to the Houston police on August 8th and denied any participation in the murders. The following day, Elmer gave a full written statement in which he outlined the role that both he and David had played. On August 10th, David changed his story and admitted to being present at several of the murders, but he still denied participating in any of them. The killing spree by these men has only been surpassed, I guess knowingly surpassed, maybe there are others out there, but the only one that we know of who has actually killed more victims is John Wayne Gacy. He is said to have murdered 33 boys and men and has said to have been influenced by these 3. So kind of like a copycat type crime, but he killed 33. I suspect these guys actually killed a lot more, but known victims is 33 for Gacy. So a grand jury convened on August 13 to hear the evidence against Elmer and David. After listening to over 6 hours of testimony on August 14th, the grand jury indicted Elmer on 3 counts of murder and David on 1 count of murder. Bail for each of them was set at around $100,000, which is around $750,000 today.
It's crazy that David got less.
Yeah.
Because like Elmer was the one who still like came forward, basically brought this all to light, seemingly tried to work with the police more, and he got granted he still did a lot of horrible things, but just like David should have gotten at least the same.
Yeah, and even for David to have lied and said that he didn't participate. Yeah. By the time, though, the grand jury completed their investigation, Elmer ended up being indicted for 6 murders and David did end up being indicted for 4. Elmer was not charged with Dean's death, as prosecutors decided that that had happened in self-defense. Both men rejected pre-trial offers of life sentences in exchange for guilty pleas. So I guess they were going to take their chances and see what would happen at trial.
Mm.
They were tried separately for their roles in the murders. Elmer's trial commenced in July 1974. District Attorney Carol Vance apologised for not being able to seek the death penalty, and he said that the case was the most extreme example of man's inhumanity to man that I have ever seen. The jury deliberated for 92 minutes and Elmer was found guilty of all 6 murders. The judge ordered that Elmer serve each 99-year sentence consecutively, totaling 594 years. Elmer started applying for parole in July 1980 and all of his applications for parole have been denied. He's next able to apply in October 2025. Elmer appealed his conviction and he was given a retrial in December 1978. The second trial began in June 1979. The jury deliberated this time for 2 hours. Elmer was again convicted of the 6 murders and was sentenced to 6 99-year terms, only to run concurrently this time rather than consecutively. David's trial started in February 1975. As we mentioned, he'd been indicted for 4 murders, but he was only taken to trial in the end for 1 murder, which was the murder of William Ray Lawrence, who was 15. The jury deliberated for 90 minutes again, and David was found guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison. He also appealed his sentence, but his appeal was dismissed in 1979. David did pass away in May 2020 in prison at the age of 68 because he died from complications of COVID. So it's only Elmer is the only one of the 3 still alive. I would be surprised if he ever gets parole. Surely they will never let him out, but I don't know, maybe, I guess.
Yeah, it's like... Ugh. I just like killed a bug and now I'm like distraught. It's crazy that like Elmer and David were also victims in a way. And Dean, even though he paid with his life, like he was killed by Elmer, it's almost like he was the worst, the most horrible person, did this to Elmer and David, sucked them into all this. And it's like he didn't really get punished, it feels like.
No, he was able to do this 3-year killing spree, and then obviously he died, but he was able to carry it out until the very end. He didn't ever have to face accountability,
like the public knowledge or the public knowing what he did and what a disgusting, horrible person he was. He didn't have to go to trial. He didn't have to face the families of any of the victims. Like he kind of just got off in a way.
So as we mentioned, Dean, Elmer and David have been confirmed to have been linked to 29 murders. Between 1970 and 1973, though, 42 boys vanished from Houston Heights. I had a look at the population. Mm-hmm. The population today is 40,000 of that suburb. So, I know it's still a fairly decent size, but 42 boys. It's wild when one person goes missing from an area. I would not be surprised if there are these other, additional victims that just haven't been found. Maybe they had another dumping ground somewhere. Maybe Elmer didn't know about the dumping ground. Maybe he just didn't come forward for whatever reason. But
and there could be ones that Dean did on his own without their knowledge.
Absolutely. So it's just insane to me that 42 boys from one suburb vanished in 3 years.
And surely it's kind of along the lines of how I said there's never going to be a serial killer like there was back in the 70s, 80s.
Controversial.
Which people love to try to fight with me about. But it's because even with this many people could not go missing in this short of a time from one area without people starting to realize what was up, just because there's more communication, there's the internet, there's social media, there's more news coverage, TV, more people are connected, and like we said, there's just like everything tracks you, phones track you, everyone has cameras, there's so many ways to just like keep tabs on people and what's going on, that like this many people in an area could not go missing again. Just like a serial killer could not be killing like 10, 20, however many people in an area again over a pretty short period of time, because people will realize.
Even like when we talk about the Long Island serial killer, that was over quite a number of years, whereas this is literally a 3-year period.
Yeah.
It's mind-blowing.
And granted, they did say that they had like the boys call their families or whatever, but still, even today, I get people are like, back in my day, like the parents didn't have to worry about their kids as much. And as kids, we like just went off and did whatever we wanted. But like today, that would not be happening. Like imagine one of your kids calling you and just be like, hey, mom, like don't worry about me. Like
I'm 13, I'm just running away. I'll be like, oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just not the same.
So in terms of the victims, authorities were able to eventually identify all of them except for one. This is information from the National Centre for Missing and Exploited Children about that victim. It says this young man was one of 17 bodies discovered in the boat shed. Investigators believe that he was between 15 and 18 years old at the time of his death, and he'd been likely deceased for 12 months or more prior to 1973. So it says he was possibly Caucasian, but he may have also had some type of Hispanic background. Investigators believe his outward appearance, though, would have been primarily white. According to the medical examiner, he had brown hair, which was approximately 7 inches in length, and he also had a mild form of spina bifida, which may have caused him lower back pain, may have affected his walking. However, there may have also not been any noticeable symptoms. It says that the centre has worked with the Harris County Institute of Forensic Scientists, and they have provided a reconstruction of the boy, like an age progression. No, it's not really an age progression because he passed away at that age, but it's a very clear image. Like I feel like if that was your child, you would probably recognize him. It says that he was found with belted Catalina brand swim trunks with vertical red, turquoise, gold, and dark blue stripes. The swim trunks also had the letter C in the center of the wings on the silver buckle. And his T-shirt also had a handwritten inscription believed to read either LB4MF or LBHMF or L84MF, which I'm like, that is...
It's very mysterious.
Yeah, like why would that be written on the shirt? I don't know. There's like...
What could it mean? Could Dean have done it? Like if it was handwritten, or very weird.
I just also can't believe, though, that someone who was murdered before they were 18, so the age of 15 to 18, and there's no match. Like there's no missing... It seems like there's no missing persons report for this teen. After now all these years, like 50 years, no one has come forward to say that this is their missing child. It's very, very sad.
Yeah, unfortunately, it seemed like Dean knew the right people to target.
Yeah.
That like wouldn't be missed or noticed missing as easily.
Even for this victim to have had spina bifida, like I know they said it may have been mild. I wonder if the parents knew, but even that is such an identifying condition. Like, you know, you would think that. But maybe the parents just assumed this child had run away or had, you know, whatever. There was a reason for why and just never reported him missing.
Yeah, very sad.
So I'll pop the photo of this victim on the blog if you want to have a look. I guess one plus is they were able to identify the rest of the victims.
Even with like all the modern DNA technology, hopefully at some point they'll have the funds to test this person's DNA as well and maybe like find their family lineage or something.
Yeah, you hear of that more and more, obviously, with all these, you know, ancestry websites and things like that. Maybe one day they'll just pop up as a match with a family member.
Yeah. This is definitely been one of the most like horrible, heinous cases that we have covered. Not to like compare at all because they're all horrible and heinous, but just the details of this one and the sexual torture is really sickening. And I do feel like maybe that's why it's kind of been said to be the worst serial killer that you've never heard of, because it's just like so sickening that people don't even want to talk about it. But it's just scary to think that there's people out there that could do this to innocent children to anyone, really. It's just very scary to think about. I mean, I guess there was some justice, at least. Like I said, it kind of feels like a cop-out that Dean died.
Didn't have to face the music.
Yeah. But that is the whole story. Obviously, there's not going to be any updates unless somehow we get
More
the
bodies.
identification of that last person or more bodies are found.
Yeah.
But that is the story in full for now. We'll have a blog on this at truecrimesocietyblog.com, like always, with all of our sources and everything. Make sure you're following us on Instagram. We're always posting the latest updates and true crime stories on there. True Crime Society on Instagram. If you want to see what we're up to, my account is StephSum_. Olivia's TCS Olivia. If you want to see our exciting lives. And we also have a Patreon, if you didn't know. We do weekly bonus episodes, and we do all the episodes ad-free, so you'd be getting 2 episodes a week instead of just 1 without any ads. We also have some fun chats. We have like a book club chat. We ask for episode ideas. We do Q&As, things like that on there. So if you want more from us, check us out on Patreon. And then otherwise, just the usual stuff. If you could leave us some nice comments on Spotify, make sure you're still following, share the podcast, post your Instagram stories, like whatever you guys are doing while you're listening to the podcast. We love resharing them and seeing what hobbies you guys have. It's very interesting to see and fun. Like, you guys have a lot of cool hobbies out there. Or your pets. A lot of dog walking. Love to see a dog.
A lot of
or a cat,
crafts
like
too.
Pete.
And like, I feel like people always say like I'm, doing this specific craft and listening to you guys, which
yeah. So we love seeing what you guys are up to. So keep that up and we'll reshare them. I think that's it. I think that's all the points. So thank you guys for listening. Stay safe out there. Peace out.
See ya.